Hey, Angela.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Metropolitan Council Committee of the Whole, in case you thought you were somewhere else. And it's today's April 3rd, 2024, and we're here to get a much more detailed updates on Imagine 2050. But first, as the agenda, unless anybody objects, I will consider it approved. But we do have to approve the minutes from our last committee of the whole, which was March 20th, 2024. Is there any corrections, additions?
So moved.
But a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the minutes are approved. And we're on to our update, welcome.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. It's good to see you. I hope all of you know by now I'm Angela Torres, the Senior Manager of Local Planning Assistance. The reason that I'm in front of you today, though, is because I'm also the equity sponsor for the Regional Development Guide Imagine 2050. So even though I'm the one that's kicking us off today, I am one of a vast team of teams that is working on equity, working on the Regional Development Guide. And so I just want to first say that this is a collective work. It integrates the engagement work that we have been doing externally as well, but the teams and task forces from the internal staff side have been working on this for a couple of years. And so what you're seeing in front of you today is an amalgamation of all of that work. So with that, I will say that we have several things to go through, so we might be working on a timeline, and so we will try and keep things moving as quickly for you as we can. So thank you. Today I'm just going to do a couple of recaps just on both the statutory responsibilities of the Council, the equity framework that the Council has endorsed previously, and introduce you to the major components of the equity chapter before the individual components representatives come and speak to you more specifically. Statute requires the Council to do a regional development guide, and that regional development guide often talks very specifically about the orderly and economical development of the metropolitan area. I think that that is maybe a quote or a phrase that most people are very familiar with. I want to point out the phrase that is in the center of statute, though, where it says that the comprehensive development guide shall recognize and encompass physical, social, and economic needs of the metropolitan area. The Council has, by statute, an obligation to think about the residents of this region in many different facets, and that's what we're here today to talk about. In previous work, the Council has established that equity is a value of the Council and how you want us to do our work and how we want communities to expect us to show up. The Council has also endorsed a regional goal that states our region is equitable and inclusive. Racial inequities and injustices experienced by historically marginalized communities have been eliminated, and every person feels welcome, included, and empowered. And the Council had several conversations about that equity goal over the course of 2023, and then offered their final language endorsement in January of this year. Last fall, in September, the Council also endorsed a equity framework for the Regional Development Guide, really focused on three tenets of equity. First being contextualized, really centering communities' account of their history, centering the history of a place or a neighborhood or an environment. Really working with community in a community-centered engagement approach, working with impacted populations to co-create solutions. And finally, a reparative approach, creating solutions commensurate with what caused the inequity, and doing that through communications with community itself. that again endorsed by the council in September of 2023, and you'll see that contextualized, community-centered, and reparative is reflected in all of the concepts that you're here, the frameworks that you're going to hear about tonight, and it is the lead for what all of that work was based off of. So equity chapter major components, the equity framework really guides all of the work. We're just talking about the major components of the equity chapter tonight. So we're not talking about existing conditions, we're not talking about metrics or accountability, those pieces will come. But we're talking about the major frameworks that we're trying to do our work based off of. So environmental justice framework is something that you endorsed the definition for environmental justice last fall as well. And we have a framework now similar to the equity framework to guide EJ work at the council too. Other staff will be here and talking about community-centered engagement. So really, how are we going to operationalize, change how we do engagement work here at the council? And our communication staff has a framework that they will be working to put together as well. Housing staff are leading the efforts to create an anti-displacement framework. I think that you have talked a lot about anti-displacement over the course of several huge projects that the council has undertaken, and how we can do that, how we can operationalize that within the council as well. And then the last thing on the agenda, although certainly not the least, is an effort to work with, here it says the Native Advisory Council. We've amended that advisory council to be the American Indian Advisory Council to be reflective of that direction from our council staff, Allison, Waukau, who is the co-lead on that effort. And we'll be talking about a group, an advisory council that we pulled together to talk about what started out as a land acknowledgement, but what has turned into commitments to the land, water, and people that we're co-creating with that advisory council. And that's very exciting work, and look forward to having sharing that with you as well. So we do have next steps. As I mentioned, the equity chapter, these are just the major components, so there's a lot of accountability and commitments yet to be developed. Metrics and measurements or benchmarks are very important, and we have yet to develop that work. We will, and we have met, and we'll be continuing to work with our research staff to help develop some of that work. We, as always, will continue our engagement efforts, listening to community needs and reflecting any new concept or needs that are brought up at those through those engagement efforts, and continuing our ongoing internal discussions to prepare for implementation. So with that, I'm going to conclude that brief overview. I know even that was a lot of information, but I want to spend time with the different teams and allow them to share those big picture concepts and frameworks that we're working on developing. So I think I will ask the first team to come up, which is our Environmental Justice Task Force team, to talk about the Environmental Justice Framework.
Great.
You'll see me later.
All right, no, go for it.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair, council members. Chair, council members, thank you for having us at COW today. It's truly incredible to be here. Today, we are presenting the draft Environmental Justice Framework. My name is Sarah Gong. I am a qualitative researcher in community development. I co-lead the Environmental Justice Task Force along with Angela Torres. I am here presenting with my colleague Laura Bretheim, a senior project coordinator in Metro Transit. The Environmental Justice Task Force is a multidisciplinary team with members from each division across the council. So I want to extend a huge, tremendous thank you to the team members who worked on this. We have been working on this framework since the Climate Action Work Plan was adopted in December of 2022. This work really started with the Climate Action Work Plan, which was a multi-year process. This is the definition of environmental justice for the RDG. It has been seen and reviewed by COW in fall 2023. We do have supporting context of the Council's DJ definition, which is that environmental justice centers, but is not limited to Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color, disabled communities, immigrant and refugee, and low-income communities who have and continue to experience a legacy of racism or other structural or systemic barriers that have resulted in environmental injustices, harms, and risks. Through its regional values, the Council commits to conducting community-centered engagement, repairing past and ongoing harms, distributing benefits equitably, and preventing future burdens. Environmental justice at the Council requires necessary adaptations to Council services, requirements, policies, practices, processes, and decisions, starting with its Regional Development Guide to support a healthy and safe region. The work that the EJ Task Force conducts is built upon existing works over the course of years. In 2021, the first iteration of the EJ Task Force was created in tandem with the Climate Action Work Plan. There is an environmental justice commitment established in the Climate Action Work Plan, and the EJ Task Force is helping to create an EJ framework that will guide that commitment. We are a subgroup of the Equity Task Force. Equity and EJ are very interconnected. The three components of the equity framework are also overarching principles of environmental justice. Environmental justice frames these principles in the context of people and their relationship to their environment, including land, air, soil, water, plants, and animals. The EJ framework provides guidance on how to integrate EJ principles into the practices and policies set by the Regional Development Guide. To create the EJ framework, the EJ Task Force reviewed existing EJ frameworks and EJ-related material from local EJ-focused organizations such as Waukau Awanyankapi, partner agencies such as the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the state of Minnesota, and similar agencies and MPOs across the country, such as King County in Seattle and Oakland County in California. In our review, we looked for content, structures, and principles we wanted to adapt for the Regional Development Guide and for the context of the Council. We also looked at the 2050 RDG engagement data for data related to environmental justice, which helped us understand a localized regional context for environmental justice. We currently have a contract with the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, and so we worked with C. Terrence Anderson to host an environmental justice workshop. C. Terrence facilitated this workshop, and EJ Task Force members shared a very broad, expansive, and ambitious ideas of what EJ at the Council and in their roles meant. He then synthesized our lengthy discussion, and members of the EJ Task Force adapted it to fit within the RDG. Then the EJ Task Force distilled the synthesis into the draft framework we are presenting today. Before we get into the framework, I'd like to go over conditions for success. The EJ Task Force wants to emphasize that environmental justice is not only an outcome, but a process and a journey. In order for this to be fully realized, the Council must fulfill these conditions of success to apply the EJ framework. Our first condition is expand the scope of how we measure the efficacy of Council projects through a broad environmental justice lens. Our second is build upon current Council structures and processes to define environmental justice as a necessary and explicit component of Council work. And our third component is reconcile the Council with overburdened communities through shared environmental justice values. This is our environmental justice framework, which is rooted in our equity framework. Our three components are, number one, data and lived experiences of overburdened communities inform our decisions. Number two, prioritize engagement with overburdened communities. And number three, community benefit that goes beyond harm mitigation. And now I will pass it over to my colleague, Laura Bretheim, to go in depth in the framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll go into more detail on what each of the components of the framework entails. So our first framework component is people-centered, data-driven decision-making. And this involves understanding data and lived experiences of overburdened communities and how they inform decisions. Thank you, Sarah. There we go. Some of that means understanding environmental history by valuing and integrating that lived experience via both quantitative and qualitative data, understanding that both of those are critical. identifying, addressing, and being transparent about practices that may perpetuate environmental justice. It also means understanding environmental history and present experiences related to communities who have experienced a legacy of environmental racism or other structural or systemic barriers like disability, ageism, or being in poverty. And we can achieve this by creating processes that not only mitigate harm, but also build environmental benefits, tracking and sharing our engagement findings across the council that are related to environmental harms, and integrating our past engagement results into new and current projects so that we can leverage cross-council work. All right, our second component of the framework is engagement and collaboration, prioritizing engagement with overburdened communities. This means building reparative and respectful relationships that are aware of a community's autonomy and capacity, creating early and iterative engagement processes so that there's time for communities to give informed input on processes, also co-creating processes with community partners, and building on the work that the council has done for many years to collaborate with partner agencies in this work. The third component of the framework is looking at community benefits. So this goes back to the idea that we referenced before of building benefits that go beyond just harm mitigation, ensuring that the benefits of the council's work and investments meet a community's self-identified needs, providing transparency about investments and benefits, and then documenting and publicly reporting our EJ benchmarks and metrics. So in terms of next steps, like Sarah referenced earlier, this EJ work builds upon the EJ commitment that's in the Climate Action Work Plan. That commitment is up on the screen here. It says we will incorporate environmental justice principles as we plan, implement, and evaluate our climate work, which directed us to consider environmental justice across many types of climate projects. And we'll be presenting a bit more on the climate-specific EJ work next week at next week's council meeting. Additional next steps include embedding environmental justice principles across our planning efforts. So our EJ task force team is conducting policy review of the various policy plans involved in the regional development guide planning process, and then looking to develop metrics and implementation measures. As Angela said, that's a process that's coming down the line. So I'll pass it back over to Sarah for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Laura. We would like to open it up for discussion, and we do have questions for feedback. So our first question is, one, what resonates with you about this framework? And our second question is, how do you see this framework advancing the council's regional planning efforts? With that, thank you so much for having us here today.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Sheehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I've heard a lot of this before, and what they've done is really tremendous. What really resonates with me and will also advance the council's regional planning efforts and is based on my 30 years of experience is your word transparency. So it is huge. I've worked in significantly impacted communities with toxic chemicals and radiation and pollution that is tremendous. And it's always been my firm belief of transparency is the number one thing. And it's very hard to convince people that it's a good thing. And I've worked with Fortune 500 companies to get them over the hurdle. And we have to get over that hurdle in everything we do is transparency. And so I just continue to put that at the forefront. And that's how you build trust. That's how you have discussions. That's how you have engagement. And so I'm glad to see that in multiple places. And I think that will transcend into the other work that we're doing in the Council for Regional Planning across the whole Metropolitan Council is just open the curtains, who's behind the curtain and what's going on, and open it up and let people see what's going on. And so I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember Cedarberg.
Great, thank you. And go this way now. Councilmember Boyd. You
Okay,
got
just
it.
wondering here, you just pointed at me right away.
Well,
Actually, how are you defining an overburdened community, and then how would you build a metric around that? I know you're not here to build metrics today, but I guess it's the first I've heard use that phrase overburdened.
Yeah, Thank you for your question, Councilmember Pacheco. So overburdened is a term that is used in a lot of environmental justice community spaces. We also see it reflected in Justice 40, which is the federal government's environmental justice policy. What constitutes as an overburdened community is a community that has experienced cumulative impacts from legacies of systemic environmental harm, such as continued exposure to particulate matter, poor air pollution, water contamination, et cetera. So basically, if you break it down, it's a community that has disproportionate burdens of climate change adding up and accumulating over time. These communities are disproportionately Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, but it also impacts low-income communities as well as disabled and aging communities. There's also the federal definition of LIDAC, which stands for Low Income Disadvantaged Communities. I have a research, there is lots of resources that I would be happy to send over that really encompass what constitutes as a low income or disadvantaged community, but LIDAC is very similar and almost interchangeable with overburden.
We're not lacking acronyms in this.
No, we are not. It's like alphabet soup.
And to the question about building metrics around that, like you said, Councilmember Pacheco, that's an ongoing process, and there are some national guidance that we can point to, both related to Justice 40 and the EPA's past work on environmental justice. There's some quantitative data tools specifically that can help us build a framework that makes sense for the council for that. Did you want to add anything else, Sarah?
Yeah, and in addition to metrics, EJ Task Force is currently in the process of strategizing implementation. We are a multidisciplinary team, meaning that we have members all across the council divisions and almost every single policy area represented in the council, in the EJ Task Force. And so our members are going back to their respective divisions and their respective policy areas and really working to understand how we can implement the EJ framework into their policies. Our strategies will be contingent upon the different policy areas. They're on different timelines, they have different scopes, and our metrics will also be contingent upon that. So we will collaborate with our outcomes and metrics researchers as well as the different policy areas to understand what metrics to be more bespoke to their respective policy areas.
Right. Councilmember Lillard.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and Sarah and Laura, thanks so much for this work and this education, right? And Councilmember Pacheco, thanks for bringing up the word overburdened. I was going to ask almost the exact same question, but that word really resonates with me, right? And before this meeting, Councilmember Barber and I were talking about how policy language evolves, and there are terms that I think maybe unintentionally or intentionally, I think, kind of put people in sort of different levels, and I feel like overburdened is just a clear description of what it's like to live within an area of cumulative impacts. I lived in the Phillips area for 40 years, right next to 35W in the Arctic Triangle. I still live with the health impacts of being overburdened by the contamination that I was exposed to at the time. So I really like that word, and I feel like it's moving us in a clear direction. So that resonates with me. Another piece that really resonates with me is this idea of engaging people with lived experience, and I'm hoping someday we come up with a better word for that even, that kind of evokes, I don't know, HUD and things like that for me, but this idea that people know what they know, they know what they need, they know what they want, and so how as policymakers in a big agency do we engage the people who are most impacted by the decisions that we make. So that really resonates with me, and I think that's advancing our work, so thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Lilligren.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Totally echo that. I do like the word overburdened. I think you can apply that to microcosms in different areas across the region, whether it's areas of high ag runoff into, or some of the rural rail yards that have long-term pollution concentrations and things like that. My comment was, I chair the Transportation Policy Plan Work Group, and we're to the point where we're through objectives and, now moving on to policy and ultimately to performance measures. So like I have sincere appreciation of how what you framed out here really actually ties already to some of the things we've put out as objectives, because they are things that ultimately can be measured and reported and be transparent to Councilmember Cedarburg's point of view. Things like we have specific healthy and safe as we mitigate and avoid harms to people caused by transportation, infrastructure and use, such as air quality, noise, lights, those sorts of things. And those are things that we can actually track and see the different impacts. So I appreciate kind of concentration. I think it also helps make it real for people and relatable. And maybe when we're making decisions of which corridors we're going to put zero emissions buses in first or something like this, it's this sort of approach that will help us make some of those decisions more by data than by feeling, which I think is always helpful. So I really like this.
Thank you, Councilmember Barber.
Great comments. Sorry. Sue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for this presentation. I would just like to note, and this is more of a question than an answer to your questions, but I'd like us as a council to think about how we can engage with communities and counties in a proactive way to address future industrial climate and environmental issues. The Dakota County Township Officers Meeting was held a couple Saturdays ago, and I heard quite a bit about PFAS in communities that I didn't realize were dealing with it in Wells. I thought we had heard about the list of communities being impacted by PFAS. We haven't. We're just starting, and it's not just PFAS. And we've got residents in our region who are very, very, very concerned, and they don't feel heard. And I think we as a council have a role, maybe not directly, but certainly indirectly, in making sure that they're heard and that that issue is addressed. And I think as we're going out and looking for economic development, we need to be looking for economic development that's responsible for what it brings in and what it leaves when it exits.
Thanks. Thank you, Councilmember Bento.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks. Building off everybody's comments, things that resonated with me is the fact that this has been in development since at least 2021, maybe even before that. I love the fact that you're building off of the NPCA's definitions and work and the EPA, Waukau TP, other state agencies, other agencies around the nation. So I learned the best by examples, and the first thing I think of is the zero emission buses that you brought up and how we prioritize where those might be located. PFAS is another good example. As you're talking with the task force, what other examples, possibilities, things that we're not doing right now that using this framework we might be doing differently in the years ahead? Anything that really jumps out for the two of you? Maybe it's like decision making around how we fund brownfields, like where those are funded, or livable communities grants in some way, shape, or form. I don't know.
Yeah.
The sky's the limit, I guess. But are there other like big things where it's like, oh, it's clear that this is a great spot to use this?
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. I would say maybe on a bigger scale, I think there are so many people at the council who are, and processes at the council that are set up so well to work very well, but people who may not be aware of including environmental justice in those processes yet, by no fault of their own whatsoever. And so I think there's myriad small and large opportunities to really figure out how this is embedded in our processes in a intentional and systematic way, from things like grant funding to brownfields to transit decisions, and many things in between. So that's how I would respond at this point.
Yeah, great answer, Laura, and thank you for your thank you for your question, Councilmember Lindstrom. I would echo what Laura said, and I'd also encourage us to look at our processes as well. And we really want to emphasize that environmental justice is iterative. It's an ongoing process, and our outcomes are only as just and equitable as our processes are. So really examining how we do our work, who is involved in our work, how we are responding to communities experiencing these issues, as well as making sure that we are valuing both quantitative and qualitative data, understanding how this data was sourced, where it came from, and really continuing to collaborate with our partner agencies. I see a lot of power that the council has to convene our partner agencies to ensure that we have a shared understanding of environmental justice values, to explicitly look for environmental justice connections among our partners' works. So I think we can really leverage our influence here as well. Thank you.
Dr. Carter.
Yeah, I really like the framework components, particularly number 3. Meet communities' self-identified needs. And so that really struck me, and I like the effort to try to move towards that.
Thank you, Councilmember Carter. Dr. Carter.
Tony Carter.
Thank you. I also appreciate very much the presentation and would resonate strongly with that area of meeting the needs of communities that they've identified themselves, qualitative and quantitative approach, so that we're not just bringing data and telling, but that we're qualifying that information with real life experience, real lived experience, makes a big difference. To my mind also, this dictates an investment, that we are working toward a long-term relationship with communities, such that we're valuing the input and perspectives communities bring, so much so that we're investing in those individuals that come forth, those groups that come forth, really truly looking to collaborate in an ongoing relationship. And that's just an observation that I wanted to share. It doesn't come out here, but I know that it does in other places, not in the EJJ here, but in other places that co-creation we're looking for does require that ongoing building of capacity and investment in those who are participating with us. I just wanted to call that out and thank you. I think the framework is very good.
Thank you, Councilmember Carter.
John.
Mr. Chair, I think the other half of that overburdened is under-resourced, and I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, is that we can identify a problem, we can identify what's overburdened, but we ought to have another half of that coin and what the investments or whatever else we need in these communities.
Mm-hmm. That resonates with me. Thank you, Councilmember Pacheco.
Well, Laura, Sarah, great presentation, and you can tell we made it more robust from these wonderful comments. I have to say, what really resonates with me is your curiosity and humility, that this is the essence of co-creation, is that how we approach community, and the fact that we're looking toward benefits to go well beyond harm mitigation. I mean, this isn't about getting back to zero. This is about enhancing this prosperity. So it's really great.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. With that, I think we're going to hear from Michelle. Is that right? Your team? Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. Good evening. My name is Michelle Fure. I am the Manager of Public Involvement in the Communications Department here at the council. I don't get to speak to you as often, so this is a privilege for me to be able to support not only this equity framework work, but to be able to be here today and talk about this aspect in particular, the community-centered engagement focus that is such a critical part of it. You'll start to hear some themes emerging as we all present this work today. These pieces are all building on each other, and that's really, really important. In part because it's all part of this equity framework, but also because there are different aspects of the work that each of these frameworks is really focusing on, but they're all part of the whole. So I just really hope that that is starting to become clear to you today as we move through these things. So a little bit of, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey through our work in engagement in particular, because we got the foundation for our current engagement strategies and how we're making sure that we're building on those in the last regional development guide. So Thrive 2040 gave us some foundation that we will be building on and embedding more strongly in our regional plan this time around. The importance of reiterating a little bit some of the foundation for community-centered engagement in the equity framework is to really focus on people, on co-creation, on leading with community voices, and some of the things that you have also called out, transparency and being proactive. And Councilmember Lilligren, you talked about the lived experience term and how, alternatives to that as we move forward. It really is about expertise and figuring out the way to really account for community expertise in these processes. We have all kinds of expertise in our processes and making sure that we're lifting up those community voices as experts in their own experiences. This also allows us to have some innovation and imagination as we do these things moving forward. So as I mentioned, a little bit of a journey. We had in the equity commitments in the Thrive 2040 document a commitment to engaging a full cross-section of the community in decision-making. As a part of that, there was a call to create something called the Public Engagement Plan, which we did in following the adoption of the plan in 2014 and began to implement in 2015. That was a community-centered process. We engaged a number of different community leaders, a number of different community organizations, and it also was part of a broader conversation about the Equity Advisory Committee, that all of these things came together. And it was co-created, and there were specific aspects of the public engagement plan that came directly from community. And that was the first time in my experience here at the council, which is getting longer as the days go, that we actually did center community voices in these processes. The other piece that was really prominent in that process was a shift to a more relational engagement approach, that we're creating relationships with our communities and people in our communities that should live longer than the one conversation or the handful of conversations we're having on project engagement. And what I think is happening with the Imagine 2050 work is we're really beginning to embed that more in our practices as an organization and to really call those things out. 10 years hence, obviously we should be in this place where we're having some experiences that are foundationally changing how we do this work. The other piece that had to happen in the last 10 years was acknowledging and moving toward compensation for community expertise. It took some time. As I know, I presented to all of you, it seems like not that long ago, a change to our interpretation of the public purpose doctrine so that we could actually compensate community members for providing us expertise. That took a long time, but it was a critical piece. And as a result of that, now we can at least bring some more resources to the table for people who are in various, conditions of availability and frankly should not have to donate their time to helping regional policy develop. So that was part of that outgrowth of the 2040 work, was to make sure that we handled that. The two main things we hear from community on a consistent basis are the compensation piece and budgeting, that we should pull budgeting for engagement out of project budgets and have them be more transparent and more clearly available for people to see how we're really investing in community, those resources. And that's a question that, as we talk more about this today, I will be asking for your feedback on. So start to think about that piece as we move forward. So in the 2040 plan, when we put together the public engagement plan, there were 8 principles identified for engagement by the community that we have continued to carry forward to this day. Equity, respect, transparency, relevance, accountability, collaboration, inclusion, and cultural competence. Those all have lots of additional words that help define them. But each one had an important aspect that they didn't want to be buried in some broad general definition. They wanted these principles to really stand out. And what they allow us to do is have a little bit more of a framework for measuring engagement. Did we achieve these things when we're engaging with community? And I think the other point of evolution for Imagine 2050 is going to be clear definition of what those metrics look like. So be thinking about that too as we move forward today. So as I mentioned, we've had some growth, and what we're really adding in the Imagine 2050 piece is, previously we had this public engagement plan that lived outside the regional plan. This community-centered engagement framework lives within the regional plan. It should be embedded in it. It should be council policy. It should be regional policy. And that, what we've been able to do in this 10 years of growth is actually get to the place where we're doing that. The related things are some of the things you've already been hearing about the equity framework and the hallmarks of it. Capacity building, making sure that community members are leaders in engagement activities and that they are viewed as leaders in engagement activities. Providing resources and specific budgets for this work. And then the notion that the work that we're doing, especially when we're engaging communities that have been under-resourced and overburdened, is being reparative and making sure that we're responsive, as well as respectful, relational, and culturally relevant. So on the screen in front of you are some pictures from some of the engagement activities that have been being conducted as part of the Imagine 2050 effort. You've been experiencing these things in your context, which is super fun for all of us to be able to point to. In May of last year, you got the first taste of the youth cohort as they presented to you and provided you with critical information about what they see as the needs for this region in 2050. Recently, it was within the last couple of weeks, you got to see the results of our second cohort, where we are intentionally creating relationships with people in the region as leaders in their own experiences to bring to the table the needs and expectations of the future for our planning efforts. Those cohorts were compensated, and they were at the center of creating the processes that they went through. We did not tell them what to do. We just gave them the frame and we gave them the resources to do it. That is how our engagement should be happening on a much bigger scale than it has historically, but this effort has really shown us the value of that, and we've been able to live that out. We also have some much more intentional engagement with audiences who are, and people who are in community who are being directly affected by some of the decisions that we're making. Making sure that they are in a place where they can participate as they would like to participate, with outcomes that they understand, and again, with compensation and supported well with resources. That is the current state of the work that we're doing around regional planning, and it should be the future, more so even in the future. I'm so pleased to be able to sit here in front of you today and say that we're doing this work, because it was starting 10 years ago. We were just dipping our toes into the water, and over the last many years, we've been able to, through experiences in a lot of the different areas that we're doing planning around, be able to show the value of intentionally engaging people in their own experiences and compensating them to do so. The first time that we actually did this was several years ago. The council had some internally competitive equity grants, and we worked with the transportation team and MnDOT to do some work around Reimagining 94, which is in the news again these days. And we paid community organizations to do engagement, and that was one of the first times we'd done that. We also did it with some transit studies that were surrounding the Green Line when it was launched as a light rail line here in the region. So we had a few examples, some successes, and some lessons learned that we could build into a program that is now really robust and something that we are committed to putting money into. And we should be continuing to put money into that as a budgetary priority moving forward. This is something that I'm sure a few of you have seen before. It is a modified version, I'll be honest, it's a modified version, of what is commonly used by the International Association of Public Participation, or IAP2. It is a spectrum of engagement. This is something that we want to formalize. We've been certainly using it informally for many years now, but this is going to be formalized as part of our overall engagement expectations, that we have clearly identified spaces on this spectrum that we are providing engagement across. The key to an engagement spectrum is that you live in all spaces on it. And I would say that a lot of government organizations in particular struggle to get to the far right of that spectrum. And that's where we've adjusted it a little bit. The IAP2 spectrum has empower in the last column, and what we've tried to emphasize here at the council is co-creation and co-leading. Because the idea of empowering means that we're still vesting power somewhere. And is it really us that's vesting the power, or does community come with the power? Does community come with the agency? Does community come with the ability to come to the table? And that is why those terms are being used in this case. But the idea there is a true shared agenda and co-creation process. And that is happening certainly in a lot of our engagement activities. Where are we able to do that in our decision-making processes? And one of the questions I'm going to ask you in a few minutes is, how much of our work should be in that column? And how do we measure success when we look at whether we actually did share agendas, whether we actually did share co-creation in those spaces and our ability to do that? Collaboration is also a very healthy space to be in. Sometimes you can't share the decision, but being able to collaborate with community and with leaders who represent various points of view in community is also very powerful, and it's really important. The key to the IAP2 spectrum that I want to make sure is emphasized today is that line that talks about the promise to community. What are we promising that we will do and that we will make sure is real for community in each of these spaces? And they're generalized on a spectrum like this, but every engagement effort should have that promise to community, and we should be really clear about what that means when we're engaging with community. So we have some plans to do some engagement on this framework with community members. First, to go back to the folks that were involved with us creating the public engagement plan and say, are those principles that you identified 10 years ago still valid? Should we define them differently? Should we emphasize them differently? What does transparency look and feel like to you in community? What does accountability look and feel like to you in community? We've never asked those questions of our community partners in this kind of way before. So it's a real opportunity to highlight that and make sure that's also a piece of this policy. What does it mean to truly center community voices in our processes? We might all have opinions about that, but what do community members say? How do they know that they've been centered in a process? How does that feel when they're involved in those efforts? Qualitative and quantitative measures, of course, as I mentioned before, and budgeting practices. Real clear expectations for how we articulate the budgets that are being put into engagement. The other thing that I wanted to make sure that I noted is that we already have time on the schedule for the Equity Advisory Committee. We'll be going to present some of these things to them. I'm really interested in ways that we can partner with both the EAC and other community organizations to make sure that this engagement feels as authentic as it needs to, so that we're really getting out and asking these questions. So those are pieces that are all part of our plan. So as with the other groups, I'm here with some questions. What resonates about this with you? Where would you like to see us set some clear measures, both qualitatively and quantitatively? And how can our engagement practices better translate to your decisions? This is ultimately what we're here for. We're here to support you as council members in making decisions. And you need to have the confidence that the right voices are being heard in these processes, and we want to know what that feels and looks like to you. With that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back to you and to the
Thank you,
council.
Michelle. And first up is Sue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Michelle. With regard to, what resonates with me is the partnership with community organizations. And I'd like you to consider AARP. A number of the cities, counties, townships have been looking at the age-friendly program that AARP has. And they address a lot of the issues that we're working on in our 2050 plan. It's part of what they're trying to achieve as all of us age. They want to be ready for us, some sooner than others. But I think it would be a great partnership to have. I know we've had a partnership with Trellis, but having worked with the age-friendly program, I'm really impressed with it. And they've got a connection that it is pretty deep and pretty meaningful.
Thank you, Councilmember, I appreciate that.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I do appreciate the sort of public engagement plan and what you've done over the last few years to make it more community-centered, especially as we're looking at projects and things like that. Like, I do think we've seen that. You see it especially when it comes to our outreach along the ABRT lines and some of that, which has really ultimately led to the anti-displacement programs. And so you can kind of see where all of that's going. I have some concerns as it relates to the regional development guide. She smiled, she's probably anticipated my question. You know, going through the process before, you had the, you know, Thrive 2040, then the cities and the counties and townships, they all had their own community engagement. Some did a great job, others didn't do as much, but I had some that, you know, had these huge sessions with their community, getting people in, getting all of the community in different types of things. And it feels a little bit, and it could be completely perception and not real, so this is part of why I want to ask this question, that instead of, you know, regional development guide and then the cities and the counties and townships do their comp plans and do the community engagement, we're kind of skipping over them. And so, because we're the ones ultimately have to go out and talk about this with all of those local governments, and, you know, they have a role in this too. And so, you know, whether it's helping us get tools to communicate that, or to, you know, if that is a misconception, I don't think I'm probably the only one that will have it. I think I've heard some of that from my cities. They may be on some of the advisory committees, but as a whole, are they hearing their voice? So I guess I don't completely know what I want to ask, but I think you know what I'm headed towards.
Yeah, Councilmember, I appreciate that question. Thank you very much. I think it's one of those things that's challenging when you have a regional level of government, that we have relationships and responsibilities to community, and so do local governments, other local governments. I think it's really important, and perhaps we should explicitly state that we're not taking that over from them. We are not trying to take that away from them. We are not trying to supplant in any way the value of local relationships that continue to exist. That being said, I think there is better partnership that we could do, and perhaps some, you know, along the same lines as the model that our local planning assistance team does, provide technical assistance and opportunities for partnership that we maybe haven't done in the past, so that it feels like it's not such a big undertaking to try and engage large groups of people around, particularly big topics that are regional in nature, right? I think for what it's worth, I think it's very important to draw those distinctions, and I'm not sure what the perfect line is, but I agree that the question is really important, and that people should not feel as though their voices aren't as important in brokering those relationships as the voices at this table are. So I think that's a place where we can perhaps grow this a little bit, not just as we're doing the engagement on this guide, but in the coming years, because those relationships persist, right? Does that answer your question?
That's helpful, yeah.
Councilmember Carter.
I really appreciate what you've shared with us tonight, and, you know, looking back at the engagement spectrum, the changes that are made here, and the intentionality of calling out each of these areas is really important, and making certain through the engagement that we are doing that we are living in all of these spaces and paying attention to where we are and sharing where we are, you know, in those spaces as we engage with community, I think is very important. Because quite often we get the question, what is the point of this engagement? And sometimes we get stuck in the tell, hear, listen even, and then do mode. Instead of, or I should say in the plan, tell, hear and do, and then back to plan. And we are often asked the question, when do we hear back, And so it's important that this is an ongoing relationship and that we put that hear back step in it before we do, before we go back to plan, change and do. Our partners really want to believe that they are hearing how we synthesize that input, that they come to the table to provide, and that they know how we'll use it, before the use happens. Again, we have to tell where we are in terms of the engagement spectrum, but also where we are in the engagement loop, because it should be a loop, we should be circling back. I think that is the full intention of what you are sharing here. I sometimes feel very different too about budgeting. You asked the question about budgeting for engagement. I feel like engagement is a utility. And we all know that it makes the wheels turn. We have to have that engagement part of it in order to plan and do, again, depending upon where we are in that loop and where we are in the phases or in the stages of engagement. But I know that we haven't developed that type of muscle in all spaces where it just becomes a natural part of what we do. We pay for electricity, we need to know we have to pay for engagement. We're setting ourselves up as an organization that will have that engagement across the board. And so at this point in time in our life, as an organization, it seems to me that we have to make sure organizationally that we have the capacity, that we're staffing appropriately, that we are able to use good engagement practices to ensure that engagement is and does what we need it to do. So I very, very much support the thought of lifting that up and having organization-wide engagement capacity that is then utilized across the board. And I really do want to reinforce that loop has to exist, because I hear that so often that we don't know what happened. We don't know how our voices were used until we see it maybe 10 years later or somewhere. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember, I appreciate that.
Jim.
Mr. Chair, as the co-chair of the Equity Advisory Committee, I appreciate the potential and the intent to partner as we go forward. I've spent the last 3 days and maybe 1 day last week, and we got another 2 more days of interviews for the potential members of the Community Advisory Committee. And so there's 21 applicants, and even then I started out with the interviews thanking them for coming out to take part in the efforts that we're doing. And I got to tell you, some great feedback from them as well on what they see as the potential of this committee, and great candidates. So I'm looking forward as all of us move together as far as where we're going with engagement. Again, there were some really, really good candidates, so I'm looking forward to working together on that with you all.
Awesome, thank you.
Great, thanks for that insight. Any others? Councilmember?
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Robert.
And Michelle, congratulations on the progress that you made, and that you have this 10-year history to kind of gauge the progress. So I'm really excited about what you presented and the progress that you've shown us in. Someone who kind of got into the policy realm by being a pushy community activist and got into these kinds of conversations and just being lost, and it was all on my time. And I would always urge, if you want community engaged, then listen to it, figure out how to engage us in a more authentic way. So I feel like that's the path that we're on here, so this really resonates with me, and part of what we're talking about in my, oh, and I like the modification that you made to the spectrum, I really do, because that empower piece, it feels like someone's holding the power, right, and you're sort of doling it out, and so this approach of co-creation and co-leadership, I think, is a good one. And to me, a lot, I'm trying to say too many things. I really want to lift up what Councilmember Barber was saying, and Councilmember Johnson and I had a really similar conversation recently about engagement, and at the end of the day, no matter how much engagement you're going to do, some people are going to feel like you didn't do enough, right? And will always be susceptible or open to those kinds of criticisms. And so for me, this goes to the transparency question, right? If we can show people how we were deliberate about engaging them, so maybe that's some kind of a quantitative measure, how, being able to be transparent. And to me, a lot what we're talking about here is trust building, right? People distrust government in general. They might distrust this unit of government than some others. And so how do you measure trust? Is that even impossible? Is that even possible? And part of what's balancing here and how engagement practices can better translate into our decision making. So as policymakers, we have relationships through our communities, through our districts, and as staff, they have very rich relationships, in maybe different ways. And to me, sometimes I feel like there may be a disconnect in understanding the qualities of our different relationships, what a policymaker does, what staff does, and so that lack of understanding or maybe misunderstanding that goes on there can, I think, sometimes lead to conflicts or at least feeling that we as policymakers are maybe less confident in what we're seeing. And so I just feel like the way that policymakers are engaged within the spectrum is important for us to see. I mean, we know at the end of the day, we're gonna take the votes, right? And that's our job. But I feel like there's a disconnect there somehow, that if we could see that a little more clearly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, any other questions, comments? All right, Dr. Carter.
Just a comment. I just wonder, what really resonated with me was the compensation for community expertise. There's been many times in the past when I would be involved in a committee or giving up my time on a community issue, and I would look around the room, and most of the BIPOC people were the unpaid people, and everyone else were the paid people. And I would think, well, we have jury duty, we pay people for that. Why don't we extend that notion? And I'm glad to see that you picked that up and that you're going forward with it. So it's great, and I hope we can expand on this, and just because it goes to valuing time. If you value a person's time, you're showing that you value that person. When you don't value their time, you're giving a message that you don't value that person. So if we value people, we have to value their time. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. One note on that, there are still some advisory committee roles that we cannot compensate. That's in state law.
Yeah, well.
So that is certainly an agenda item to do.
For the future. Michelle, thank you.
Yeah.
I think a lot has resonated here. I love the idea that engagement is being presented as not a one-time thing. This is building on relationships, developing relationships, maintaining the relationships. So,
Thank you very much.
yeah, thanks so much. All right, we're now going to hear about our anti-displacement framework, and Maia and Olivia, welcome.
Hello. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Maia Guerrero-Combs. I'm a senior housing planner in the Community Development Division, and I'll be co-presenting with my colleague.
Yes, I'm Olivia Boerschinger, also a senior housing planner in the Community Development Division.
Yeah.
So we're here today to present the anti-displacement framework. We represent a larger team and effort. So I really want to take the time today to say thank you to all of our team members, as well as the Equity Task Force who has been supporting us in all of this work. This has been a multi-year effort, and so we are excited and very honored to be here today to present the proposed anti-displacement framework for the Imagine 2050 Regional Development Guide. Okay, so, I'm in charge. Okay, there we go. This work emerged as a response to the growing need for a coordinated strategy across divisions that considers the impacts of council actions and investments in regards to displacement. I think it's important to start by acknowledging that this region has a prominent history of displacement, which has occurred through various ways, including private and public investments and development patterns. These have divided communities and overall limited the economic, geographic, and social choices of residents in the region. Additionally, past discriminatory policies and practices, such as redlining and racial covenants, have resulted in generational collateral consequences for the Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our region that persist today. As a result of those consequences, it is important to be transparent on how we can contribute to the repair of those generational impacts. With that acknowledgement, I really want to commend the work of this council in adopting the equity framework, which asks of us to be contextualized, community-centered, and reparative in our work. These three concepts have been the foundation that has guided the development of the anti-displacement framework, as well as our check to make sure that we are on the right track. These three concepts are represented in the anti-displacement framework through the context of people and their relationship to home and their community. This can include physical structures, amenities, cultural connection, and sense of belonging. This work is not new. Discussions and actions around displacement and our role in neighborhood connection have existed for years. For example, I really want to call out the incredible work that the Blue Line Anti-Displacement Work Group has done, and this framework really builds on all of this work that's been done on anti-displacement around the council and kind of has gone in to create this framework on how to integrate anti-displacement strategies into the policies and practices throughout the organization in a holistic way. So I've used this word displacement. What does it mean? What am I talking about? Displacement can take many forms. A lot of the times we hear the word gentrification. So, and that displacement is an outcome of gentrification. And that is when there are social, physical, and economic changes in a neighborhood that can lead to physical displacements of the residents who are originally residing there. But displacement isn't just a loss of housing. It's also a loss of what makes a place home. That could be the loss of access to necessary amenities such as groceries, doctors, playgrounds, schools, social networks, language, cultural sites, places of worship, and local businesses. We also see displacement in access to natural resources and places of cultural significance. Displacement isn't always physical. It can be emotional. When we think about our favorite neighborhood or our home, we think about the physical aspects, but we also think about how we feel when we're there. And displacement can result in loss of that emotional connection. Displacement can happen long before actual physical changes happen in a neighborhood. You can see it in the planning stages of a project, in site selection, and things like that. And displacement can happen long after physical changes occurred in an area. I think it's also important to call out safety, and that displacement can result in residents feeling unsafe, whether that's a physical or perceived unsafe feeling of being unsafe.
All right, thank you. So building on the description of displacement that Maia shared, what do we mean when we talk about anti-displacement? So on the screen above is a definition of anti-displacement created taking a look at a large variety of different definitions that already exist, working with our peers, and reviewing them to create what it means in terms of relationship to the Metropolitan Council. So this has been presented cross-divisionally and shared with other policy plan areas so far. Again, really centering that equity framework component, the contextualized, community-centered, and reparative. So
When we say anti-displacement, we mean an active process of centering and empowering communities to protect their home, access to resources, and a sense of belonging from loss due to a council investment or policy. Oh, yes, this did come up very small. I'll be sure to read through them so we can, it came up a little smaller than expected. So in the previous slide, we have identified anti-displacement as an active process, which has 4 integral components that need to be present through the development of policies and actions. So each of these components of success here should be incorporated into that process of policy development and applicable across policy areas. So reading from above, to prioritize those most impacted by displacement and reduce harm, we want to see these key components present. So it should include the preservation of and strengthening of existing cultural connections, cultivation of community inclusiveness, both newly created and strengthening existing community inclusiveness, being justice-centered, so repairing historical injustices to create equitable community outcomes for overburdened communities to remedy historic and ongoing harm. And then finally, prioritizing overburdened communities, so that are most impacted by displacement. So as Maia mentioned, this could be low income, BIPOC communities, communities of different abilities, so forth. To kind of set the stage for our strategies, we have what we would see is almost like an objective or a goal of this anti-displacement framework. This highlights the way displacement is experienced and is representative of what we heard in our qualitative work conducted across the division. So the overarching goal or objective is to increase the ability for residents to keep their housing, amenities, health, and/or sense of belonging in a neighborhood. Within that, and again, continuing to use this equity framework as a guiding source, there's 3 strategies that are components of this objective, centered again in equity. So the strategies are council investments, we'll go through an anti-displacement risk assessment, prioritization of projects that support community connections and anti-displacement in our grant programs, and provide best practices and resources through engagement and collaboration with overburdened communities. So Maia will now go more in-depth on each one of these strategies and what they include.
Great, thanks Olivia. So kind of similar to what you saw with the environmental justice framework, we want to integrate people-centered, data-driven decision-making in our work. And what better place to start than with our own investments projects and to be a leader for others in the region around the work of anti-displacement. So the first strategy is that council investments go through an anti-displacement risk assessment. This component of the anti-displacement framework focuses on identifying potential impacts of council investments early in the process, especially regarding community connectedness and the ability for residents and businesses to keep their sense of place, health, culture, and amenities. This strategy focuses on highlighting resident engagement and community-identified needs, as well as centralizing quantitative data to take on the responsibility of addressing community concerns in our decision-making processes that are not already accounted comprehensively in our council processes. We recognize that a lot of our work already does this. Applying this framework strategy will ensure that it is done holistically and consistently throughout all areas of the council. Strategy number 2 is to prioritize projects that support community connection and anti-displacement in our grant programs. So this is when possible, including prioritization in our investments for projects through our grant programs that increase community connection, minimize displacement, are justice-centered, or focus on place-based investments. We're currently working with each policy area to identify how this could be incorporated into their grant programs, and we expect this to be an ongoing iterative process that will continue throughout the decade. As housing planners, we would be remiss if we didn't highlight the need to continue to prioritize deeply affordable housing. We know that one of the biggest contributors to displacement is the lack of access to affordable housing, and so it's important that we prioritize the development and preservation of affordable housing throughout the region, whether that's increasing affordable rental and ownership options through development, or supporting ways that residents can stay in their homes. And then the third strategy really gets at the point that we don't have all the answers to this. Anti-displacement and displacement is really nuanced, and while we can focus on our own projects and investments through this framework, we need to build technical assistance and best practices with our partners around the region, whether that is city or county staff in organizations, academic organizations, nonprofits. We need to make sure that we're listening, co-creating, and sharing the work that's already being done around the region around anti-displacement. And so this strategy is providing best practices and resources through engagement and collaboration with overburdened communities. And in order to do that, we really need to build reparative and respectful relationships with the community and make sure we're building the capacity in organization to do that work and create tools to share data, best practices, and provide technical assistance.
All right, so with all of that we just shared, we realize again it's very nuanced, it's very complex, and we're still figuring out how exactly it's going to be applied. But we created this framework. We wanted to pose some of the same questions that you've heard today of what about this framework resonates with you, and where can you see this framework being applied across the council? So in different policy areas and in what other capacities?
Well, thank you, Olivia and Maia.
Yes, yes.
And this is clearly a subject where many of us are engaged with the Blue Line, but it goes beyond that. I really appreciate this council-wide perspective. Councilmember Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say I really appreciate under the what is displacement, it's the loss of home, not just housing. If you look at, you've heard me talk about things, some of my communities have lost during COVID, a grocery store, or a doctor's office, or a dentist office. Those things are profound to communities and really can have an impact on people's daily lives. So it's like looking at it holistically and what makes your community your home. And I think that's kind of key to all of this. And I actually appreciate just seeing it written out that way.
Great. Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And thanks, Maia and Olivia, for this. I find this really exciting, and it seems like sort of a new direction. It's really been sparked by the Blue Line work, by being able to apply this more broadly. And one of the things I see this being applied across the council. This is one of the areas that I do feel can be experienced. Displacement can be experienced anywhere, right? In the region, and often that displacement can be advanced by our investments, and whether that's a road investment, transit, or whatever, or through how we plan our communities. And so I would like to feel that more about this, that it really is sort of I don't want to say equalizer, but it really can be applied equally across the entire region. It just may be different forms of our policies or investments that might accelerate displacement, and it's sort of a tale as old as time, right? We give land value and then sort of take it from the people who are on it currently, and that's kind of how we do things. We make properties ripe for redevelopment or growth, and that has impact. And so that's how I would like to feel this. I would like to see, I think a lot of us, and myself, well, I should just speak for myself, I hear displacement and I think of things like burdened communities or communities of color or low-wealth communities or dense communities, but it really is anyone could be displaced. And so I would like to feel that throughout the policies. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You were talking in the beginning about the history of displacement. Do you have more information about that we could read in more detail? Because I would be interested in knowing more about the history of displacement. I mean, I'm old enough, I remember when the interstate system was being built through the metro. We talk a lot about Rondo, but my grandparents' house in North Minneapolis was torn down to build Interstate 94 in North Minneapolis, and their house was torn down, I think, sometime around the early 1960s. I know they didn't have it in when I was little enough to remember, maybe 2 years old, and that didn't actually get opened until early 1980s or mid 1980s maybe. So yeah, it can be a long time in between. But when I look at like census information for 1960, Minneapolis was like 97% white. And so to say that this is a history of affecting people of color, I'd really like to get a bit more rounded understanding of who has actually been affected by displacement, and what places we're considering that besides the interstates or other major public works projects. To have a better understanding of what that means. And if you want to respond to that, I have another question.
Keep going.
Okay. And then I think it's going to be particularly important as we discuss the Blue Line extension, because the property impacts from that look like they're going to be massive, to the point where it could potentially make Rondo look like nothing in terms of going through the heart of the community and really making disruption. So I think that information will be very important as we make our decisions.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. We would love to send out some more information. We've been doing a lot of research, so we're excited to share out what we've seen with all of you.
Yeah, Sue and then Robert.
Yeah, I recently overheard a conversation. I wasn't eavesdropping, I just happened to be at a laundromat in the Battle Creek area of St. Paul. I was cleaning some rugs and sitting and waiting for my washing machine to finish up. And I overheard a woman describing how a wall had been built just outside her apartment window. And I don't know the location of it, but I'm kind of guessing, I think I know where it is. And I'm wondering, you know, from an anti-displacement standpoint, I think we really need to think beyond a project going forward. Anti-displacement doesn't end when the ribbon's been cut and everything's all celebrated. It continues on. And I mean, we've seen that with Rondo, we've seen it, I'm sure, with North Minneapolis and other areas. But I think we really need to think about it. This woman was actually saying, I no longer have sunshine in my living room in the morning. I think I would like to move, but I don't know where to move to. And I'm guessing that her resources were limited. So I really think we need to think about that. And I think we need to think about it in such a way as, what can we, you know, what do we need to anticipate? So, thank you.
Robert, then Angela.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And just really to agree with what Councilmember Vento was saying, Councilmember Wolf as well. And so I am old enough to remember, Councilmember Wolf, when the houses were demolished to make way for 94. There was actually a fairly established Native community in Minneapolis at the time that just got completely wiped out. I probably had 6 households and relatives who lost their homes. And then you're right, it was decades before anything really happened. And in the request for more data, one of the things that I found really interesting during my time on the Blue Line Corridor Management Committee was how, I mean, this kind of goes for your saying, Councilmember Vento, but it's actually, there's like it sort of reverberates beforehand too, and that as we're planning for investments or land use changes or anything, displacement starts to happen long before there's an active project or a change in land use form. And so I would like to, as we bring more data forward, I would like us to see some of that as well, please. That even having this conversation, you know, we could be displacing or at least accelerating displacement. And so I would like to see some of that data too, please. And thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. And I think Councilmember Lilligren's point is really important, which is why it's so important to have this be a part of this planning process, because what that means is that as we're moving forward, we're thinking about this, it requires, the anti-displacement work requires that intentionality from even the ideation phase of each project. And so embedding it in And this plan is so critical, and that's why I'm really excited that this is going to be a part of it. And the other thing, yes to what all the council members have said. And I also want to elevate that communities, a lot of what you explored in the framework and strategy really highlights residents. I also want to uplift the fact that communities are also made up of businesses and other entities that create that sense of community, and so also being inclusive of those voices as well, because we have a lot of really, really wonderful established historic businesses, or those that are really embedded and invested in the communities and create that sense of space or that culture around communities. And so you can think about the region and different ethnic hubs or different areas where communities are centered and focused around that area, and it's really important to maintain that as well, so I just encourage including that in the framework.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just had one more thought. I think I'm budging ahead of Councilmember Carter. She maybe should go first.
Well,
I'm okay.
I think she's fine.
Okay,
Go
great.
ahead, finish
Okay.
your thought.
All right, I
Tony.
want to suggest that we think about an anti-displacement advisory group and bring in people who have been displaced, businesses, residents, schools, whatever the case may be, including many of the folks who were pretty harsh critics. And I think we need to be asking questions like, what did we do well? What could we have done better? Did you feel heard? Just look for ways to really reach out and be authentic about our anti-displacement work.
Tony.
Thank you. I just want to add this little bit that I think we're all saying, and that is planning ahead, engaging ahead, having this organization-wide focus on engagement makes so much sense. It does start even before project ideation. It does. It's about planning communities and making certain that those who live there are a part of that plan, even before the idea. And, I'm just getting familiar. I'm familiarizing myself with community designations, and with, what is it, form something?
Form-based code.
Form-based code, Thank you. And all that stuff that is planner's language. And acknowledging that, I don't necessarily get in the plan until the project is coming. And that is just too damn late. I need it to be in the discussion before the planners started talking about it. So when we're thinking about this engagement focus, it's got to be beyond, and I guess that's why I truly support organization-wide community engagement. It's got to be beyond the project. It's got to be about our organization and the work that we are doing with our communities. And I needed to have known what a community designation was a long time ago, so that I could understand the journey that I'm on as a member of the community. And we're the drivers maybe, and Met Council in some perspectives, but I want to know where I'm going. And so I can know and iterate and start planning, what I'm going to take with me, what I can leave behind. So I'd love us to be in a space with our communities where we actually talk about it. I don't want just you to know, because you're a planner, that this is where I'm going 30 years from now. I want to know so that I can be planning what my children will be doing in that environment if I stay. So thanks. I really, really appreciate everything you've said. Thanks for letting me add that.
Maybe for you, Sue, although, and I love that this applies to our whole region, that it's part of our regional development planning process, that isn't just a project. I think Terrence Anderson and Kara did quite a bit of work with the Blue Line and worked with a really good kind of advisory committee, and we could have access to those reports, because I think that is what you just asked for, and it's kind of insightful to hear from community, those that who are truly facing a project, whether it's too late or not, it's real, so those are real concerns. I know in my own experience, in between first and second year of business school, I had a job working in Brooklyn, taking an inventory of buildings, 5-story buildings that were going into city ownership out of tax foreclosure. So this is just what I would call naturally recurring affordable housing and natural occurring gentrification. Because it's next to a park, Prospect Park, no big project. Just the economics of cities are living and breathing and changing. And the fact that 5 Latina families were being displaced by one investment banker buys a building at an auction for $40,000, fixes it up. And I checked recently, those are $4 million houses. I mean, so you think about where cities have changed and how they evolve, they do. And then I think just understanding that from our development guide, not just project-based, but just an understanding of kind of where we are as a community. And I think some of the work that's been done in the past about the constituted areas of affluence in this community are largely goes back to generations ago redlining. I mean, we should be aware of that. And I think that some of those things are just, Tony, to your point, let's just have our eyes open here. Any other thoughts here? Dr.
I just want to say, it just brings to mind that displacement is the original sin this country was founded on. And so every time we look at the subject, we're revisiting that. And I'm glad to see that it's going to play a big part in what we're going to do going forward. And I hope whenever I'm doing something, I always look at the worst examples of what I did wrong. And that helps me to gain the insight and the humility to go forward in a better way. And as long as we're building that into our process, I think we're going to be okay.
That's a receipt of it. Yeah.
So, as long as we're embedding this across the council, what kind of, this was new language for a lot of people in the staff and the council. I mean, not necessarily. So somehow this has to get out in training for the staff as well. And just to familiarize themselves, the checklist to, I'm working on a project, it's environmental justice. There's so many new things being added to our Imagine 2050, which resonates with us and the community and the staff. But let's not lose focus that we have to continue and embed it, and so there has to be a process to get it embedded in the staff.
Right.
All right, you got me out there on this one. No, Councilmember, I'll just say, I think there's an order of operations, right? And so right now, the conversation needs to be happening through the different means tonight and with council members, and then cascading through the upcoming pieces of process. I think then the question naturally turns to that piece of how are you applying it within and across the organization. We can make that a priority of things that we're sharing as we go forward. That's the implementation question in front of us over the next number of years. I think it's important in the order of operations to recognize it's both an important dynamic and not necessarily the one that's right in front of us today. So thank you for raising it, and know that it's on the agenda here for myself and other leaders as we go forward.
Order of operations to an engineer is great.
You got her kind of excited here. Sue.
I just wanted to note, thank you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note that one group that I don't think has been noted tonight, but I would hope we would consider, are the immigrants and refugees. Yesterday afternoon, I had 2 technology technicians at my house. One from Ukraine, he's been here about 8 or 9 months, he and his wife moved here. The other is from Kazakhstan. He's been here a little longer, but he came to this region via New York, Chicago, and he finally landed, he said, someplace where he feels comfortable, which I was glad to hear he felt comfortable. But it was really interesting talking with them. And I would hope that we think about how we can engage with the refugee and immigrant community. They're facing some tough times. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, questions? All right, we'll take the big time. Thank you so much. We will continue this. Great, so, now, I think we're gonna hear from Allison.
Yep.
Welcome. And Angela's back.
Yeah, I did promise I would be back.
Yes, you did. We were sure. Great. Welcome back. Welcome.
All right, hi everyone. Allison Waukau, I am Menominee and Navajo. My clans are Tatanasani and Owasso. I always like to introduce my parents, Mary Alice Osei and Lawrence Waukau. And I think next week I'll be going into month 4 here as the new Tribal Liaison and Native Relations Coordinator. So very happy to be here. Angela and I are going to be talking about the land acknowledgement, and I first want to say thank you to Jillian. She, although Angela and I are working on this and presenting, Jillian has been instrumental in support, so thanks Jillian. And I feel that today, our presentation being kind of the finale, seeing my colleagues present and the discussions, it really ties into this work. I think we're all coming to like the same grounding area, and really excited and happy to be here and be part of this work. One of the things that I want to touch on is sovereignty and inherent sovereignty. I think it's really easy to say sovereignty just by itself, but inherent sovereignty is something, it is acknowledging that we were governing ourselves before anyone else arrived at this land. And I think with a land acknowledgement, a history of land acknowledgements are Canada and New Zealand and so forth, and they do acknowledge the land, but I think one of the things that our land acknowledgement is going to bring forth is acknowledgement of sovereignty. So acknowledging those government-to-government relations. And so we really hope to see that come forth with our work within the community and the advisory council that we brought forward.
Thank you, Allison. I'm only here in support of Allison. Like she said, she started about 4 months ago in December, and obviously the Imagine 2050 effort didn't start just then. So there were some things that were in process along the way, and so we're very happy to have Allison's leadership now, and Jillian and I, Jillian who is in the audience, I know you were all looking for her earlier, are here in support of Allison, of the advisory committee, and of Councilmember Lilligren, who is providing a lot of sponsorship and leadership in this area. So prior to December, we had initiated tribal consultation. We had been given the go-ahead to work at the staff level with Shakopee Metawakan Sioux community and the Prairie Island Indian community. I know that others across the council, and maybe Allison has even since she came to the council, worked at the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. Chair Zelli, I think you usually attend those meetings and present on behalf of the council. But Imagine 2050 engagement doesn't just include tribal nations, it also includes community organizations and residents that represent tribes that are either not necessarily federally recognized or that aren't part of the 11 tribes recognized in Minnesota. And so we have residents in the region from all over the place. Some of the community organizations that we have had engagement with include Young, the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center, Minnesota Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe Twin Cities, Owamni Yamni Akodayapi, and Wakantipi Awanyankapi. Some of those are very well-known advocacy organizations. Others represent community service organizations. Young works with young people that that are either highly mobile or unhoused, and obviously the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center works on women's issues and I think a lot of public health issues. So those are efforts that have been underway, have happened, and we continue to do additional engagement, and thus this is part of that overarching effort. So we started by having council policymaker conversations. Councilmember Lilligren, as I mentioned, is a sponsor and champion of this work. We did get support from our contract with the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs for that extra capacity on helping to develop strategies and an approach of how we might move forward with a land acknowledgement. We did outline a proposal to create an advisory council to the Regional Development Guide Council Member Working Group and received approval for that process in December. So perfect timing, Allison. And we received strong support for the approach, which included co-creation, specifically development of actions in order for an acknowledgement, which we were calling it at that time, to be meaningful and to address some of the challenges that we know land acknowledgements have had over time as they have become more common in different areas. And to include all of those commitments that the Advisory Council may create in Imagine 2050 itself. So the one main thing is that this effort was to be led by the Indigenous community, Indigenous staff, and Indigenous policymakers. So maybe even a little bit more than co-creation, we're really deferring to what the community needs and the community is voicing to us. And we will bring those recommendations here to the council. We may ask the members of the advisory committee or advisory council to actually present some of that information themselves if they feel comfortable doing that. Otherwise, we will be here again in front of you. With that, I'm going to sit back and support Allison, and she's going to talk about the effort that is currently underway.
Yeah, so with the advisory council, we're calling it the American Indian Advisory Council. And it was really important to us to have youth, adults, and elders present within the council, along with Prairie Island and Shakopee representatives, and also having an equal male-female component. So we started off, we're going to be meeting twice a month, and within the next 4 months to develop a statement and then also have the actions. So our next meeting will be looking at, most of them have already had relationships with the Met Council already, but really giving them more of a defined overview of what Met Council does, so calling it Met Council 101. And so then after that, we will split off into really analyzing the different divisions and reviewing the Imagine 2050 policies and actions we like to say indigenize, so really kind of put our own passions and priorities within the document. So one of the things that was brought up, Dr. Kate Bean, we're really lucky to have her a part of the council, and she has done amazing work within the community and the state and in the nation, really. Her family is great leaders, and one of the things that she always says that it's a great first step. So don't think that this is going to be an endless journey, and something that we always have to keep coming back to and analyzing and so forth. So one of the things that she brought up, though, is she has been a part of land acknowledgement work in the past, and every single time it has not been successful or fulfilled. So they ask her to do this work and then they don't fulfill their commitments. So she asked that it be changed from a land acknowledgement to a land commitment. So we are rewording this, and I have to say that this is amazing that Met Council were able to to showcase this. change here in the Twin Cities as a commitment. And I think that is really well worded, well said by Dr. Kate Bean. And so it will be an inclusion of land, water, and people, and a commitment to them. And I think that really coincides with Imagine 2050 really well. So let's go on. Okay. So next steps, we will be meeting through June and working alongside the council to really combine their components and things that are a priority, their priorities and goals. We have, with Councilmember Littlegren's guidance, really stepped it off in a our first meeting was wonderful. I have to say, I had such a warm heart after leaving. I was a little apprehensive. You never know how, what's going to be said. And it was even with the guidance was to have what is called inner circle, outer circle discussion. So what it is the community members lead the discussion and the staff sit on the outside and listen. And I think what that did was really gave them the space to voice their concerns, and in a way that we are not telling them what we're doing, but giving them the space to speak. And it couldn't have gone any better. And so I really would like to see that inner circle, outer circle. I think we're going to be doing it so making it within the engagement work as well with our Imagine 2050. So really looking forward to indigenizing some of the engagement here at Met Council with that. So I thank you, Councilmember Littlegren, for that. And so I'm really excited over the next 4 months. It'll be a lot of work, but I feel really good with coming here to Met Council. I feel that people here, the staff here, are really willing to hear what the council has to say. The advisory council, I'm sorry, there's two councils. So the advisory council is going to say, and really willing to listen and adjust and change. And I think that is, it makes my work easier, but also I think it makes us more successful. And so I'm really looking forward to this work and seeing what happens in June. These are a couple resources. I have been doing land acknowledgement consulting work and over the years, I would say in the last 8 or so years. And so these are some of the YouTubes that I like. That I do have, Julie was able to put together some of the resources that I really like. There's some articles, there's some books, so forth. So if anybody is interested in resources and wants to learn more, I'm happy to share those. And I think, I was scared we were gonna run out of time, but yeah.
Well, hey, we're not done.
Yeah. But I was really cognizant of time. That was one thing.
Thank you, you did great.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bretheim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to be very thankful for all of this work. As Angela knows, she was my sector rep when I first started council. This was something that was really particular interest to me for a couple of reasons. My husband is a tribal member, my children are Native, and my district has the only sovereign nation that fully resides within the metropolitan region. And so a couple of things. I love that there's an acknowledgement of sovereignty. That is one of the things that is hard to explain to people, and how we have those relationships and build those things out. I think it's really critical to understanding the right dynamic that we should be having. And to see that kind of conversation from our original conversations of how do we do this? We have questions on comp plans, how do we pull people together? And then ultimately have a tribal relations policy now, tribal liaison, and really see the evolution of it. And it's really just heartwarming. I'd love to see that moving from land acknowledgements to council commitments. I think when acknowledgements are lovely, but sometimes they're words that are said at the beginning of a speech instead of actually recognizing what that means. And so I like the word commitment over acknowledgement. But thank you so much and welcome. And I hear great things about you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Any others? All right, oh, Angela.
So I think this work is really incredible. One of the things that I would be interested in hearing, because of the insights that are coming out of this advisory council are so critical to our work, and is it going to be, I think there's advantages to calling it out separately within Imagine 2050, and there's also really important, there's a really important element of embedding it within the rest of the plan. And so what mechanisms or measures are in place within creating the rest of the guides? This may not be a question for you, this may be a question for Ryan, of what is in place to be able to embed these insights from the powerful work that's coming out of this advisory council into the overall Imagine 2050 plan.
Chair, if I could, I don't want to interrupt Ryan if he
No,
doesn't.
you take the first crack.
Okay. I'm in charge of some of the policy language, and so I can tell you what we're doing in some of the areas that I am working in. Number one, we're already embedding it. We heard about the need for embedding Indigenous perspectives into the work from both the Native community and the non-Native community in our engagement work already, and so we have started to do that. I think that we will see aspects of it embedded throughout, and we will likely call out the commitments separately, working through the implementation of those commitments within the policy areas themselves. That's how I would imagine us doing, imagine us doing some of that work. So it is a both and. It is, the advisory council is providing public comment. So while it is a council organized effort, it is public comment in the same way as we would receive public comment during the public comment period. And so it is incumbent upon us to integrate that. We will have a section in the equity chapter though that will talk specifically about the work of the advisory council and the council's commitments.
Great. Ryan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and great start, I appreciate that part of the answer. Councilmember, it's a great question. It applies to everything we talked about here today. I think when you think about some of the other really key cross-cutting areas of work, climate resilience would be another area you could put into that category. You do have to think about it in both ways, and I mean, we've been down this road in conversations in the past. We're not mature enough as an organization to simply assume that every business unit will incorporate it within its work. That's not a knock on the business units, it's just a recognition of the way big organizational work happens. So it needs its own call out. At the same time, if you're not figuring out how to integrate it at that time, it'll always be somebody else's job to go do it, and that also doesn't work. And so early on, I don't know if I brought it up here, but the importance of creating natural tension within organizations on key areas of strategic work is an important organizational practice for us to be doing. So how do you both work within your existing lines of business while also creating tension on those lines of business that will make people feel both uncomfortable but be invited to a table in a different way to push it? And so I think building on the comments we've heard from all the parties here tonight, that's like one of my big pieces, that there's a method to trying to find the right spots of positive tension to bring into the org, and we should keep talking about that as we move through the summer and beyond.
Great. Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks. And a couple things. I really want to thank Allison. We're so lucky to have her. She's so respected in the community, I can't tell you. And Angela and Jillian, thanks for your leadership and work on this. And I'm glad that you brought up a couple words, Allison. One is inherent sovereignty, right? And earlier today I had the opportunity to address some visitors from England. And their people are soccer fans, Tottenham Hotspurs, so it was their PR and social media folks. But talking about this idea of sovereignty, and it's an inherent sovereignty, and that we're sovereign people wherever we are, you know, even if we're not in our nations. And so there's the kind of nation to government sovereignty that I'm sure we'll learn lots more about. But there is this inherent sovereignty that I think we'll learn to appreciate. And I also like that you use the word indigenize. And in years past, and we would say decolonize, right? Decolonize wealth, decolonize this, decolonize that. But really, there's been a strong movement towards indigenizing things rather than framing it within a colonized framework. So thanks for using that. And the other piece I want to bring up, and I really appreciate your listening. I think my names have been mentioned way too much because it's really Allison and Angela and Jillian that are doing all this work. But that really being open to reordering sort of a agenda so that Native people could speak first. And I just know that if Native people don't speak first, they're not gonna speak, right? They're gonna, it'll be something else, you know, so it'll be somebody else leading that conversation. And I agree, it was an amazing, I did attend this first meeting, I don't know if I'll be going to more of them, but the people that we are fortunate to have engaged in this council are like the incredible people, elders, younger people. Dr. KP, and I was just thrilled. She was kind of a later commitment, right? And it was interesting, to a person as we went around in opening, people spoke against land use or land acknowledgements, and they said, yeah, I don't usually participate in these anymore, but they really could tell this was something different, right? And they see a future pathway to actually impacting regional policy, regional planning. It was really something different. But each single person said they don't do this anymore. They don't participate, they don't support land acknowledgements because they're just that, they're a statement and then nothing happens. So something special is going on here. I just want folks to know that. But the thing that really struck me, and I shared this with you, I think, afterward, was how much laughter there was in the room. And Native people, when they participate in these kinds of conversations, can get pretty stoic. It's kind of a joke in the community, the stoic Indian. You know, someone's gonna take your picture, they do you want the stoic Indian? Or these folks were not stoic because they were leading the conversation. And throughout the time together, there was so much laughter in the room. And I'll just note, there's laughter here as we're discussing it. So we are impacting something here in a big way, and it's cool. So good work, you guys.
Thank you. That's so good to hear. It makes, because I think, I'll just personally say, it is our traditions, our culture. I bring my whole self to this, right? So when I walk through the doors, I bring my family, my children, my future grandchildren into this. And so the laughter component is very key to my work, and so some of you might find that. But I think that's something different, I think, sometimes with my colleagues, is that I have to think of the grandchildren. And I'm excited because this guide is, and I think even the next guide will have an indigenous component, which is, I think, is very important because we are often forgotten and not included. And so this is really exciting work. I'm very happy, and so thank you all for supporting us, and look forward to seeing you in June.
Allison, congratulations. You certainly made your mark here in a very short period of time, and also important, Leanna, that really enjoyed meeting with Allison. We've been up to Tower, Minnesota, you know, but that you're not just the trailway liaison doing all the work, you're tribal coordinator. There's other people and staff within the council, including expanding some new positions in ES, some cultural specialists. I mean, so this is much larger for all of us than just one person or two.
Mr. Chair, yes, members, I would have to acknowledge the government to government workshop was done earlier in the year or end of last year. It could get kind of confusing. Yeah. I thought it was very, very well done, and it really talked about the history of a compact. What does that mean? And it had leadership from all the bands and tribes, and actually Charlie was featured in some of the videos. I think you were part of the inaugural group that took place in Met Council was sponsored. No, people appreciated it, and I thought it was, again, well done.
Well, and those of us haven't had a chance to do this kind of government-to-government travel training, started at Department of Transportation, I don't know, almost 10 years ago, and it's really made a difference, and I've certainly learned a lot. And I know a number of people have had an opportunity to go, so I'm glad you did.
It's hard to get into.
And with that, what a great afternoon, wonderful comments. this is not the end, this is the beginning, I
Yeah,
would say. And appreciate this meeting, stay tuned, and thanks for participating, and this meeting's adjourned.
Meeting